In a quiet evening at a small diner, one boy stood alone, facing a challenge no child should ever endure. What happened next would change everything. A moment of courage, an unexpected hero, and a lesson in true strength. Watch till the end to witness a story you won't forget. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories. John Cena entered a small McDonald's on the edge of town, hoping for a quiet moment after a long day. Dressed in a cap and dark sunglasses, he kept his head low to avoid attracting attention. He wasn't in the mood for public recognition or selfies tonight. All he wanted was to grab a bite to eat and enjoy a moment of peace. While waiting for his turn at the counter, something caught his attention. A boy, no older than 10, stood by the menu, his skinny frame slightly hunched as he stared at the options above. His clothes were worn, his shoes scuffed and patched. The boy's hands nervously fidgeted in his pockets, and his lips moved slightly as if he were counting. It didn't take long for John to realize the truth. The boy was hungry, but he didn't have the money to buy anything. John's heart tightened. He had seen situations like this too many times before. Without hesitation, he approached the counter. "Add a meal for him," he said to the cashier, motioning toward the boy. The employee nodded, placing an order for a burger, fries, and a drink. When the meal was ready, the cashier handed it to the boy and pointed in John's direction. The boy, holding the tray with both hands, approached John hesitantly. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice soft but full of gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you." John smiled warmly. "Eat up, kid. Enjoy it." He patted the boy lightly on the shoulder and turned toward an empty table in the corner. From there, he could see the boy sit down and take his first bite of the burger with evident relief. John leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction that he had made a difference, even if it was a small one. The restaurant buzzed with the usual chatter of customers, the hum of the fryer in the kitchen, and the occasional sound of orders being called out. John kept an eye on the boy, who seemed to be enjoying his meal, oblivious to the rest of the world. For a brief moment, everything felt calm. But peace rarely lasted long. The sound of the front door slamming open startled everyone in the restaurant. A group of 5 men swaggered inside, their leather jackets adorned with patches and spikes. They laughed loudly, their voices echoing through the space as they made their way to a table. The smell of motor oil and cigarettes trailed behind them, and their presence immediately changed the atmosphere. Other patrons glanced at them uneasily before quickly turning their eyes away. John shifted in his seat, watching them closely. They were clearly a group of bikers, loud and attention-seeking, the kind who enjoyed making others uncomfortable. They joked among themselves as they scanned the room, looking for something or someone to entertain them. It didn't take long for their eyes to land on the boy. "Hey, look at that," one of them said loudly, nudging his friend. "Didn't know they let animals in here now." His comment sent the group into fits of laughter. John felt his fist tighten under the table, but he stayed silent, his eyes never leaving the scene. "Hey, kid," another biker shouted, pointing at the boy. "You lose your leash or something? Shouldn't you be eating scraps under the table?" The boy froze. He gripped his tray tightly, his knuckles turning white. He kept his head down, trying to ignore them, but the bikers weren't about to let him off so easily. "Probably found that food in the trash," a third one chimed in. "Look at him. Bet he doesn't even know how to use a fork." "Hey, kid," the first biker said, leaning closer. "You understand human language? Or should we bark at you instead?" More laughter erupted. their mocking tones growing louder with every word. John's jaw clenched as he watched the boy try to shrink into his seat. The tension in the room was palpable. Other customers glanced at the scene, some whispering among themselves, but no one dared to step in. John took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay seated. He wanted to see how the boy would respond. There was a spark in the kid's eyes earlier, a determination that intrigued him. Finally, the boy lifted his head. His eyes were wide, but they weren't filled with fear. Instead, they burned with defiance. He looked straight at the group of bikers and said, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, "Animals, that's what you are. Look at how you're yelling in here, just like a bunch of monkeys." The laughter stopped. The bikers stared at the boy, stunned by his boldness. For a moment, there was silence in the restaurant, broken only by the faint hum of the kitchen equipment. John felt a flicker of pride for the boy's courage, but he knew this wasn't the end of it, not yet. One of the bikers recovered first. His face twisted into a scowl, and he slammed his fist on the table. "You've got a big mouth for such a little punk," he growled. "Let's see how tough you are when we're done with you." The others began to rise from their seats, their movements slow and deliberate. They weren't just mocking anymore. They were preparing for a fight. John leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing. He could feel the adrenaline beginning to course through him. It was time to act, but not yet. Not until they crossed the line. And by the look on their faces, they were about to. The air in the McDonald's grew heavy as the tension mounted. The 5 bikers, their leather jackets creaking as they moved, loomed over the small boy, their predatory grins widening. The leader, a burly man with a shaved head and a jagged scar across his jawline, leaned forward, his fists resting heavily on the broken remains of the table. His voice dripped with menace as he sneered at the boy. "So, little man, you've got jokes, huh? Let's see how funny you are when we're done." His comrades laughed, but their laughter was darker now, edged with cruelty. They were enjoying the spectacle of dominance, feeding off each other's energy. The boy, still seated, looked up at them with a mix of defiance and fear. His chest rose and fell quickly, but he didn't back down. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice trembling slightly but loud enough for everyone to hear. His bravery seemed to momentarily stun the bikers, but their leader quickly recovered. He leaned even closer, his face inches from the boy's. "You should be," he growled. John Cena sat in the corner, his eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. His fingers drummed lightly on the table as he fought to control the surge of anger rising within him. He wasn't one to tolerate bullies, especially when they targeted the defenseless. But he also knew that stepping in too soon could escalate the situation. He wanted to give the boy a chance to handle it himself, to see if the kid could stand his ground. Yet, deep down, John already knew he wouldn't sit idle for long. The biker's leader reached out and flicked the boy's burger off the tray, sending it splattering onto the floor. "Oops," he said mockingly. "Looks like you dropped your dinner. Better eat it before it goes to waste." His gang erupted into laughter, their voices echoing through the restaurant. The boy's fists clenched as he looked down at his ruined meal. He swallowed hard, his shoulders stiffening with suppressed emotion. A murmur spread among the other patrons. Some whispered in hushed tones, clearly uncomfortable, while others pulled out their phones, recording the incident from behind the safety of their tables. The staff behind the counter looked frozen, unsure of whether to intervene. One cashier took a tentative step forward, but was stopped by a sharp look from the biker leader. "Stay out of this," he barked. The cashier retreated, her face pale with fear. The boy finally stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He was small compared to the bikers, but he stood tall, his chin lifted defiantly. "You think you're tough because you're in a group," he said, his voice steady now, "but you're just a bunch of cowards hiding behind your numbers. Real strength isn't about bullying kids." His words hung in the air, slicing through the tension like a blade. The leader's face darkened, his grin vanishing. "You've got a sharp tongue, kid. Let's see if it's still sharp when I'm done with you." He signaled to one of his men, who grabbed a chair and smashed it against the floor, shattering it into pieces. The sound was deafening, drawing gasps from the onlookers. Another biker picked up a leg of the broken chair, gripping it like a weapon as he stepped closer to the boy. John had seen enough. He stood up slowly, his chair screeching against the tile floor. All eyes turned to him as he removed his sunglasses and placed them carefully on the table. The bikers paused, momentarily caught off guard by his towering presence. John's calm, commanding voice broke the silence. "That's enough." The leader turned to face him, his eyes narrowing as he took in John's size and demeanor. Recognition flickered across his face, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "Well, well, look who thinks he's the hero," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You should sit back down, buddy. This doesn't concern you." John took a step forward, his gaze steady and unyielding. "It does now. Leave the kid alone." The bikers exchanged looks, their leader letting out a dry laugh. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But there's 5 of us and 1 of you, and we've got the advantage." He gestured to the makeshift weapons his gang was now holding. "What do you have? Your fists?" John didn't flinch. He rolled his shoulders, loosening up as if preparing for a fight. "Why don't you find out?" The leader's smirk faltered for a split second, but he quickly regained his bravado. "You've got no idea what you're getting yourself into," he snarled. He motioned to his men, who began to spread out, encircling John. The restaurant grew eerily quiet, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Patrons watched with bated breath, some inching toward the exits, others too riveted to move. The boy stepped back, his wide eyes darting between John and the bikers. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. John glanced at him and gave a small nod, a reassuring smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's okay, kid. Just stay back." The leader raised his hand, signaling his men to attack. "Let's teach this guy a lesson," he said. And with that, the bikers lunged forward, their makeshift weapons raised. John braced himself, his muscles coiling like a spring. He was ready. The air crackled with tension as the bikers advanced, their makeshift weapons gripped tightly in their hands. The leader hung back for a moment, gesturing for his men to surround John. The first to strike was a stocky man with tattoos snaking up his arms. He swung a chair leg at John's side, the wood whistling through the air. But John moved with lightning speed, sidestepping the attack and grabbing the man's wrist mid-swing. With a powerful twist, he disarmed the biker, sending the broken chair leg clattering to the floor. Before the man could react, John hoisted him over his shoulder and slammed him to the ground in a flawless attitude adjustment. The impact echoed through the restaurant, and the crowd gasped in unison. The second biker, a wiry man with a sneer etched permanently on his face, lunged at John with a broken table leg. John ducked under the swing, his movements precise and calculated. As the biker stumbled forward, thrown off balance, John delivered a swift elbow to his midsection, knocking the wind out of him. The man collapsed to his knees, clutching his stomach, as John stepped over him and faced the next attacker. Two bikers rushed him simultaneously, one wielding a piece of a shattered chair and the other swinging a heavy chain. The first biker aimed for John's head, but John blocked the strike with his forearm, absorbing the blow. Without missing a beat, he grabbed the biker by his jacket and threw him into the man with the chain, sending both crashing into a nearby table. Trays of food and drinks scattered everywhere, and the patrons scrambled to get out of the way, their phones capturing every moment of the fight. The leader, watching his men fall one by one, growled in frustration. He picked up a metal stool and stalked toward John, his scarred face twisted with rage. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he spat, raising the stool high over his head. John turned just in time to see the attack and caught the stool with both hands before it could connect. The sheer strength in his grip caused the leader to falter, his confidence wavering as John effortlessly wrenched the stool from his grasp. John dropped the stool to the floor with a loud clang and fixed the leader with a steely gaze. "Heroes don't pick fights with kids," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. "They protect them." Enraged, the leader threw a wild punch, aiming for John's jaw. But John sidestepped it with ease, catching the man's arm and locking it behind his back in a powerful hold. The leader struggled, cursing under his breath, but John's grip was unyielding. With one swift motion, John spun him around and planted him firmly onto the ground with a spine buster that left the man groaning in pain. The restaurant fell silent except for the heavy breathing of the fallen bikers and the soft murmurs of the stunned patrons. John stood tall amidst the chaos, his chest rising and falling steadily. He scanned the room, ensuring there were no more threats before turning his attention to the boy. "Are you okay, kid?" John asked, his voice softening as he approached the boy who had taken cover behind an overturned table. The boy nodded, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and relief. Yeah, I'm okay. That was amazing." John allowed himself a small smile. "Good. Just stay behind me, all right?" The leader, groaning as he struggled to sit up, glared at John. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. "We don't forget." John walked over to him and crouched down, meeting his gaze head on. "You already lost. Don't make it worse for yourself. Leave now and don't ever come back." The leader hesitated, his pride battling with the reality of his situation. Finally, he spat on the floor and barked at his men. "Get up, we're leaving." One by one, the bikers dragged themselves to their feet, nursing their injuries as they stumbled out of the restaurant. The leader was the last to go, throwing one final glare at John before disappearing through the door. As the bikers departed, the tension in the room dissipated. A slow clap began somewhere in the back, and soon the entire restaurant erupted in applause. John raised a hand, signaling for them to stop. "It's all right," he said, his tone modest. "Just doing what anyone should." He turned back to the boy, who was still watching him with wide eyes. "You were really brave, standing up to them," John said. "Not everyone has the courage to do that." The boy's cheeks flushed with pride. "I didn't want to let them win." John nodded. "And you didn't. But remember, sometimes it's okay to ask for help. There's strength in that, too." The boy smiled, his fear replaced by newfound confidence. "Thank you, Mr. Cena." John patted him on the shoulder. "No need to thank me. Just keep being strong." The restaurant staff began cleaning up the mess, and the patrons slowly returned to their seats, the excitement of the fight giving way to a sense of normalcy. John returned to his corner table, retrieving his cap and sunglasses. He glanced at the boy one last time, giving him a nod of encouragement before leaving the restaurant. Outside, the night air was cool, and John took a deep breath. He hadn't planned on being a hero tonight, but sometimes fate had other ideas. The bikers staggered out of the restaurant, defeated and humiliated, but the atmosphere inside was still charged with the aftermath of the fight. John Cena stood in the center of the room, his breathing steady as he scanned the damage. Chairs and tables lay overturned, trays and food scattered across the floor, and the soft hum of murmurs from the patrons filled the air. Some clapped cautiously, while others whispered in awe, their eyes fixed on the man who had just single-handedly dismantled 5 attackers. The boy, still standing near an overturned table, finally emerged from his hiding spot. His small hands clutched the edge of the broken furniture as he cautiously approached John. His wide eyes glimmered with both admiration and gratitude. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice soft but steady. "You saved me." John crouched slightly to meet the boy at eye level, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're welcome, kid. But you didn't just need saving. You stood up for yourself, and that takes guts. You got more strength in you than you think." The boy's face lit up with pride at John's words, and he nodded earnestly. "I just didn't want them to think they could walk all over me." "And you showed them they couldn't," John replied. "That's something to be proud of." Behind them, the restaurant staff began cautiously stepping out from behind the counter. The manager, a middle-aged woman with a nervous smile, approached John. "Thank you for what you did," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We didn't know how to handle them. They come in here sometimes and cause trouble, but this was different." John nodded politely. "I'm just glad no one got seriously hurt. Make sure your staff is okay, and don't hesitate to call the authorities if they come back." The manager glanced at the wreckage around them and sighed. "We'll handle the cleanup. But really, you didn't have to step in like that. It's not every day we see someone willing to put themselves on the line for a stranger." John shrugged, his tone casual. "It's not about being a hero. It's about doing what's right." As the staff began tidying up the space, the other patrons cautiously returned to their seats. Some whispered excitedly, still buzzing from the unexpected action, while others approached John to thank him personally or ask for a quick photo. John, ever gracious, obliged with a smile, but kept his focus on the boy, who was still standing nearby, watching him with quiet admiration. One of the patrons, a man in a business suit, stepped forward. "You know, not many people would have done what you just did. Most would have walked away or pretended they didn't see anything." John shook his head. "That's the problem. Too many people turn a blind eye when they see someone in trouble. It's not about looking for a fight. It's about standing up when it matters." The man nodded thoughtfully and returned to his seat, leaving John to turn his attention back to the boy. "What's your name, kid?" he asked. "Josh," the boy replied. "Josh Carter." "Well, Josh Carter," John said with a small smile, "you've got a lot of fight in you. Just remember, sometimes it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to face everything alone." Josh nodded, his expression serious as he took in John's words. "I'll remember that." Before John could say more, the faint sound of sirens began to echo in the distance. Someone must have called the police during the fight. John glanced toward the door, his instincts kicking in. He didn't want to cause any unnecessary complications or draw too much attention. Standing, he adjusted his cap and sunglasses, preparing to leave. "You'll be okay now," he said to Josh, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Stay strong and don't let anyone make you feel small." Josh smiled, his confidence visibly restored. "I won't." "Thank you, Mr. Cena." With that, John turned and walked toward the exit. The restaurant erupted into a round of applause as he left, the sound following him out into the cool night air. The sirens grew louder, but John had no intention of sticking around. His work here was done, and the boy was safe. As he walked down the quiet street, John allowed himself a small smile. He hadn't planned on being anyone's hero tonight, but sometimes the right thing to do wasn't planned. It just had to be done. The world didn't need more bystanders. It needed people willing to take a stand, even if just for one small boy in a fast food restaurant. The following morning, the story of the McDonald's incident began spreading like wildfire. Videos recorded by patrons during the fight had made their way onto social media, showing John Cena stepping in to protect the boy from the gang of bikers. Headlines popped up on news sites, praising the wrestling icon for his bravery and calling him a real-life hero. But John, sitting in his hotel room, scrolling through his phone, didn't care much for the attention. For him, the real victory was knowing that Josh was safe and had learned an important lesson about standing up for himself. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, Josh sat at the breakfast table with his mother. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the online articles, her eyes brimming with emotion. "I can't believe what you went through," she said, looking at her son. "Why didn't you tell me?" Josh shrugged, poking at his cereal with a spoon. "I didn't want you to worry, and I didn't want to feel weak." His mother reached out, placing a hand on his. Standing up to those men wasn't weak. It was incredibly brave. "But Josh, you don't have to face things like that alone. There are people who care about you and want to help." Josh nodded, remembering John's words from the night before. "I know, Mom. Mr. Cena said the same thing." She smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "He's right, and you should never forget that." At the same time, the bikers who had caused the chaos were facing consequences. Local police had identified them from the footage and tracked them down. Charges for public disturbance, property damage, and intimidation were filed against them. Their leader, sitting in a holding cell, fumed silently. He knew the public attention on the case meant they wouldn't be able to get out of this easily. The humiliation of being defeated by John Cena in front of an audience only added to his frustration. Back in the city, John decided to revisit the McDonald's before leaving town. The restaurant had been cleaned up, and the staff greeted him warmly as he walked through the door. The manager approached him with a smile, holding out a framed photo. "We wanted to thank you," she said. "This is for you." The photo was a printout of John mid-action during the fight, with the caption, "A real hero." John chuckled and accepted it graciously. "Thank you, but you didn't have to do this. I just did what anyone should." The manager shook her head. "Not everyone would have done what you did. You reminded all of us that it's important to stand up for what's right." As John was about to leave, he heard a familiar voice call out, "Mr. Cena." He turned to see Josh running toward him, his face lighting up when he saw the wrestler. Behind him, his mother followed, smiling apologetically. "Josh insisted on coming to see you," she explained. John crouched slightly as Josh stopped in front of him. "Hey, Josh," he said warmly. "How's it going?" "Good," Josh said, beaming. "I just wanted to say thank you again. And I wanted to tell you that I'll never forget what you taught me." John placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's good to hear. But remember, you're the one who taught me something too. Your courage reminded me that strength isn't just about muscles. It's about heart." Josh grinned, his chest puffing out slightly with pride. "I won't let you down." "I know you won't," John replied. He looked up at Josh's mother and nodded. "You've got a great kid here. Take care of him." She smiled, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." As John stepped outside, the cool breeze brushed against his face. He glanced back at the restaurant one last time, seeing Josh and his mother waving at him through the window. With a final nod, he walked away, knowing that he had left a lasting impact not just on the boy, but on everyone who had witnessed what had happened. The world continued to buzz about the McDonald's incident for days. But for John, it was just another reminder of why it was important to use his influence for good. Being a hero wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about standing up when it mattered most, no matter who was watching. As he disappeared into the bustling city streets, one thought lingered in his mind. Sometimes, the smallest acts of courage could inspire the biggest changes. When it comes to standing up for what's right, courage can come from the most unexpected places. This story is a reminder that one person's actions can inspire change. What do you think? Would you have done the same? Don't forget to like, share, and comment below with your thoughts. And if you believe in the power of justice, subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire,